Wednesday, June 16th. And today I want to tell you about the massive attack that is underway against the disabled in this country. This attack perpetrated by the GOP, specifically by many of the rules and regulations that have been put into this new set of voting rules that the GOP primarily is putting out in order to protect us from the unfounded accusations of the election fraud of 2020. In one case, a woman who has limited use of her limbs and a speech impairment and uses a foot-operated power wheelchair went to vote, and she can't vote privately because of her disabilities. So she waited for a poll worker who could help her complete her ballot. Finally, when the poll worker came over, she refused to take her aside. She needed to tell everybody in the room the name of the voter and told everybody in the room her preferred candidates. Is that the way we intend to treat people under this new set of rules and regulations? When a person desperate enough to try and overcome their disabilities and to try and vote? Is that the way we're going to treat them? We're going to take them and make a ridicule of them in front of people and tell everybody what their name is and how they voted? That's not what should be going on. And that, I'm sure, is not in the voting rule changes, but that's what has been impressed upon the poll workers now, that they control everything. We have created voting places where people with disabilities can't vote privately because they need help. And on top of that, the help must be not a poll worker anymore, but a member of your family. Now, what is an elderly or a disabled person supposed to do if they need help to vote and their family lives hundreds of miles away? Is this person not going to be able to vote because poll workers are not going to do the job properly? So are we taking the disabled people's voice away and they will not be able to vote in elections? Sure looks that way. Not very well known, but for years advocates have worked to mobilize Americans with disabilities, more than 38 million of whom are eligible to vote. They want them to vote in a powerful voting bloc enough to demand that politicians address the needs of the disabled. Many of the rules against absentee voting and drive-through voting directly affect those with disabilities. You can understand why. Because if they can't walk around and they can't get an absentee ballot, then how can they vote if they can't drive through? And then, of course, you could have partisan poll watchers who misinterpret legal accommodations. Like if a voter is trying to help a disabled person to fill out the ballot, or a blind voter to fill out the ballot, the poll watcher could declare fraud, and then that ballot would disappear. So these rules and regulations are being put into place are not only going to hurt those who are poor and those who are not wanted in the voting booth in the first place. It's also going to hurt people like the disabled and the elderly who really can't vote easily on any given day. A disabled person or an elderly makes a mistake on the ballot, a small mistake, and recognizes it. The poll workers can't correct it. In some cases, if a disabled or elderly person gets help from a non-relative, the states have put a limit on that. You can only get help twice from a non-relative. And what happens if your relatives live hundreds of miles away and they can't get to the place and help you vote? So you can only vote twice. That's in 2 different elections, not twice at the same time. It would be illegal to rely on a neighbor to come down and help you vote. Is that what we've turned into? Voter obsession? Just because some unprincipled person yelled fraud, fraud, fraud when there was no fraud? And I still don't see why there can't be a single standard for voting. Why is it impossible to not have a single standard for voting? And why is it not impossible to have a group of people who are designated as voter helpers, not poll watchers, voter helpers, to help the elderly and disabled vote when they come to the polling place? Is that too much to ask if we want to have fair elections? To not make such a big fuss over giving a person an absentee ballot. Absentee ballots should be mandatory. They should have the same time cycle in every state. Shouldn't be that one state has no absentee ballots and another state has absentee ballots for weeks in advance. That's crazy. We need to get this thing under control. But it needs to be done fairly and correctly, and with as few controls as possible. And in some states, they want to ask for a doctor's note to prove that you're disabled and that you need help voting. Or they're going to send you to some doctor who's probably not qualified to talk to your specific condition. Is that not madness? You need a doctor's note to vote? Getting way, way out of hand. Then there's the craziness that goes on with your signature. If you're disabled and your illness causes you to get worse, your signature is going to change. And the same thing is true for the elderly. As they get older, their signatures tend to change. So in the states that throw in this signature matching procedure, that's going to invalidate the votes of many, many people who are qualified to vote. There's no reason to have a signature matching procedure if we set up the voter ID system correctly. If a voter ID system comes with a photograph or a fingerprint or something and is issued by a department like the Motor Vehicle Department or some other organization qualified to validate your identity, then why should your signature need to be matched? So let me say finally that this whole business of voting fraud is a fraud in and of itself, and that all of the rules and regulations that these states have come up with need to be simplified. And we should be out there trying to get the population to vote, not to suppress the votes. We have the poorest voting reputation of any major country. We barely get 50% of the people to vote. So why are we trying to suppress votes? Well, we all know the answer to that question anyhow. So I'll leave you with this, and I'll see you in the morning. Bye.